Rain battered the cobblestones of Grosvenor Square, turning the usually pristine streets of 1814 London into a slick, muddy reflection of the flickering gaslights. There, shivering in the freezing downpour, stood a woman in a ruined, 30-pound silk wedding gown. She didn't seek shelter. Instead, she raised a bruised, trembling fist and pounded on the heavy oak doors of the Harrington townhouse. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a monster. The man inside was her family's bitterest rival, the Duke of Ashbourne, and in less than 10 minutes, she would offer him a deal that would burn high society to the ground. The scent of thousands of imported white roses hung thick and suffocating in the nave of St. George's, Hanover Square. For Genevieve Sterling, the fragrance would forever be associated with the metallic taste of absolute ruin. She stood at the altar, a vision in an ivory silk confection crafted by Madame Celestine herself, a dress that had cost more than a modest country estate. The intricate Alençon lace veil covered her face, hiding the sudden, terrifying pallor that had drained the life from her cheeks. The vicar had stopped speaking 3 minutes ago. The silence in the cavernous church was no longer expectant. It was toxic. Behind her sat 400 of London's most elite, titled families. The earls, the viscounts, the gossiping dowagers, and the ruthless social climbers all gathered to witness the union of the Sterling family to Richard Caldwell, the Viscount of Linfield. It was meant to be the social event of the decade, a marriage that would secure the Sterlings' precarious financial standing. Instead, a frantic groomsman had just scurried from the sacristy and pressed a crumpled piece of parchment into the trembling hands of Genevieve's aunt, Lady Harriet. Harriet had read it, let out a choked gasp, and practically collapsed into the nearest pew. Genevieve had turned, her silk skirts rustling like dry leaves, and snatched the note. Genevieve, the hasty, smudged ink read, "I cannot do this. The debt is too great, and the heart is too fickle. Evangeline Croft has agreed to a quiet elopement in Gretna Green. I am sorry, but her shipping fortune will save my estate. Do not look for me. Richard." A quiet, collective murmur began to ripple through the pews like a rising tide. Lady Margaret Cavendish was already whispering behind her painted silk fan to Lord Percival Danvers, a man notorious for spreading scandal faster than the London gazettes. Genevieve could feel their eyes burning into her back, stripping her of her dignity, her future, and her family's legacy. The Sterlings were secretly bankrupt. Decades of legal warfare over the lucrative Yorkshire coal mines had drained their coffers. Richard's wealth was their salvation. Without it, the creditors would descend by nightfall. "Genevieve, darling," Lady Harriet whimpered, reaching out a gloved hand. "Come. We must slip out through the crypts. The carriage is waiting in the alley. We can hide at the country estate until the season ends." Hide. The word echoed in Genevieve's mind, acidic and vile. Her father had died fighting for their family's honor in the courts. Her brother had been lost at sea trying to secure trade routes to save them. She was the last Sterling. She would not scurry through a crypt like a rat. Slowly, deliberately, Genevieve tore Richard's letter into tiny, jagged pieces and let them fall like snow onto the marble floor. She turned her back on the altar, lifted her chin, and began to walk. "Genevieve!" her aunt hissed. She did not stop. She walked down the center aisle. The whispers died instantly, replaced by a stunned, breathless silence. Guests shrank back, as if her misfortune were contagious. She stared straight ahead, her eyes locked on the heavy mahogany doors at the front of the church. She pushed them open herself, the iron handles cold through her lace gloves. Outside, the London sky had broken open. A torrential, freezing downpour lashed the city, an unseasonal storm that cleared the streets of sensible folk. Genevieve descended the stone steps. The rain instantly soaked through her delicate veil, plastering it to her face. Her white satin slippers sank into the mud of the street. The 30 pounds of silk and petticoats grew heavy, dragging behind her through the filth of the gutter. She did not hail a hackney cab. She did not look back at the gaping faces in the church doorway. She simply walked. She walked for 2 miles through the relentless storm. The rain washed away her tears before she even realized she was crying. By the time she crossed into the affluent, manicured borders of Mayfair, the hem of her million-franc gown was stained black with soot and horse dung. Her elaborate coiffure had collapsed, heavy, dark strands whipping violently against her cheeks. She had a destination. There was only one man in England who possessed enough wealth, enough power, and enough sheer, unadulterated ruthlessness to crush Richard Caldwell in the Croft shipping empire. Arthur Harrington, the Duke of Ashbourne. He was the very man her father had fought in court for 20 years. The Harringtons and the Sterlings had despised one another for 3 generations. Arthur was known in the House of Lords as a man of ice and iron, a veteran of the Peninsular War who had returned with a jagged scar above his left eye and a heart completely devoid of mercy. He was 32, unmarried, wildly wealthy, and he held the deeds to half of London. He was her enemy, and right now, he was her only hope. Grosvenor Square was practically deserted in the deluge, the grand townhouses standing like silent, judging sentinels in the gloom. The Harrington estate was the largest of them all, a sprawling Georgian monstrosity of pale stone and towering windows. Genevieve dragged herself up the wide stone steps, her dress now weighing so much she could barely lift her legs. Her hands were numb, her lips blue. She reached for the heavy brass knocker, shaped like a snarling lion, and let it fall against the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Minutes ticked by. She shivered violently, leaning against the cold stone pillar. Finally, the locks clicked, and the heavy door swung inward. An elderly butler, dressed in immaculate black livery, stood in the threshold. He took one look at the soaked, mud-covered apparition standing before him and actually took a step back, his composure entirely shattered. "Good God above, Barnaby," the Harringtons' lifelong butler whispered. "I am Genevieve Sterling," she said, her voice hoarse, shaking, but surprisingly steady. "I am here to see the Duke of Ashbourne. Tell him it is a matter of immediate and devastating importance." "Miss Sterling? But the wedding," Barnaby stammered, looking at her ruined gown. "You are expected at the altar, miss." "I am standing on your doorstep, Barnaby. Please, step aside." Before the butler could stop her, Genevieve pushed past him, her soaked skirts leaving a thick trail of muddy water across the pristine, imported Persian rugs of the grand foyer. She stood under the massive crystal chandelier, shivering, dripping, leaving a dark puddle on the white marble floor. "Barnaby, who is at the door?" I distinctly ordered no interruptions. The voice came from the top of the grand sweeping staircase. It was deep, resonant, and clipped with irritation. Genevieve looked up. Arthur Harrington descended the stairs slowly. He was not in formal day wear. He wore dark riding boots, snug breeches, and a white linen shirt with the cravat completely undone, revealing the strong column of his throat. Half-empty crystal glass of amber liquid rested in his hand. He looked dangerous, informal, and utterly lethal. When his dark, piercing eyes locked onto Genevieve, he stopped dead on the middle step. The silence in the foyer became a living, breathing thing. He took in the ruined veil plastered to her forehead, the mud caked halfway up her waist, the violent shivering of her shoulders, and the raw, defiant glare in her eyes. For a long moment, the Duke of Ashbourne did absolutely nothing. He didn't gasp. He didn't ask a foolish question. His gaze simply sharpened, the muscles in his jaw ticking. He walked down the remaining stairs, his boots clicking softly against the marble. He stopped mere inches from her. Up close, he smelled of rain, rich tobacco, and expensive sandalwood. Genevieve could see the pale, jagged line of the saber scar slicing through his left eyebrow, giving him an eternally predatory look. "You are ruining my ancestral carpets, Miss Sterling," Arthur said softly, his voice a low rumble. Your carpets are ugly, Your Grace. The mud improves them. A fleeting, dangerous smirk touched the corner of his mouth. He looked over her shoulder at the horrified butler. Barnaby, bring tea, brandy, and a stack of dry towels to my private study. Then dismiss the staff for the afternoon. No one comes into this wing of the house. No one. Yes, Your Grace. Arthur turned his dark gaze back to Genevieve. He reached out, and for a terrifying second, she thought he might strike her or throw her out into the rain. Instead, his large, warm hand lightly touched the side of her freezing neck, checking her pulse. His touch sent a violent shockwave through her exhausted body. You are freezing to death, he stated matter-of-factly, and you are bleeding. Genevieve looked down. In her furious march, she must have scraped her hand against a wrought iron gate. Blood was mingling with the rainwater on her knuckles. It does not matter, she whispered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. I have a proposal for you, Ashbourne. I am sure you do, but I prefer my adversary's conscience. Without warning, Arthur stepped forward, slipped one arm under her knees, and swept her off her feet. Genevieve gasped, her cold hands instinctively gripping his broad shoulders. Her wet, filthy dress pressed directly against his crisp, white linen shirt, instantly ruining it. But he didn't seem to care. He carried her down the long, shadowed hallway, as if she weighed no more than a feather, kicking the heavy oak doors of his study open with his boot. The Duke's study was a sanctuary of dark mahogany, leather-bound books, and the heavy scent of old paper. A massive fire roared in the marble hearth, casting dancing orange shadows across the room. Arthur deposited her gently onto a leather Chesterfield sofa directly in front of the fire. He didn't immediately step away. He hovered over her, his hands moving with efficient, impersonal speed as he unpinned the ruined Alençon lace veil from her hair, tossing the expensive, muddy fabric onto the floor. He then shrugged off his dark green velvet smoking jacket and draped it over her shivering shoulders. The coat enveloped her, heavy and warm, carrying his scent. Drink, he commanded, pressing a crystal tumbler of brandy into her uninjured hand. Genevieve took a trembling sip. The alcohol burned down her throat, settling like liquid fire in her stomach, bringing a faint flush back to her deathly pale cheeks. She gripped the velvet of his coat, forcing her chin up to meet his intense gaze. Richard Caldwell absconded to Gretna Green with Evangeline Croft, Genevieve said, her voice finally steadying. She refused to sound pitiful. She delivered the news like a battlefield report. He left me at the altar 20 minutes ago. Arthur leaned against his massive mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his chest. His ruined white shirt clung to his torso where her dress had soaked him. He didn't look surprised, not in the slightest. I am aware of Linfield's weak character, Arthur said coolly. What I am not aware of is why you have brought your tragic comedy to my doorstep, Genevieve. We are not friends. In fact, if memory serves, the last time we spoke at the Duchess of Richmond's ball 3 years ago, you threatened to poison my wine if I didn't concede the eastern borders of the Yorkshire mines. And you told me that you would rather burn the mines to ash than see a sterling profit from them, she countered, a spark of her old fire returning. Exactly. So why are you here, dripping on my leather? Genevieve took a deep breath. Because you are the only man in England capable of destroying Richard Caldwell. And because the Sterlings are bankrupt. There it was, the fatal secret, uttered aloud for the first time. Arthur's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. I have known about your father's insolvency for 2 years. I assumed you were marrying the dim-witted Viscount to settle the ledgers. Without his wealth, the creditors will seize my family's estate by morning, Genevieve continued, ignoring his insult. I have nothing left, Ashbourne, nothing but the title to the very Yorkshire coal mines. You have spent a fortune trying to wrest from us in Chancery Court. Arthur tilted his head, watching her with the terrifying stillness of a hunting hawk. Go on. Marry me, she said. The words hung in the air, audacious and insane. Marry me today, by special license. You will gain undisputed legal ownership of the Yorkshire mines, ending the feud and saving you thousands in legal fees. I will gain the protection of your name, saving my aunt from the poorhouse. She leaned forward, her knuckles white around the brandy glass. But my condition is this. You use the Harrington wealth to utterly obliterate Richard Caldwell. You buy his debts, you ruin his investments, you destroy the Croft shipping lines. You leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back. Arthur stared at her. The silence stretched out, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the violent drumming of the rain against the window panes. Then, slowly, Arthur pushed off the desk. He didn't laugh. He walked toward a heavy iron safe built into the wall behind a portrait of his grandfather. He spun the dials with practiced ease, opened the heavy door, and withdrew a thick, leather-bound ledger. He walked back to her and tossed the heavy book onto the sofa beside her. "Open it," he commanded quietly. Genevieve frowned, setting her glass down. She opened the heavy cover. The pages were filled with neat, aggressive handwriting, detailing vast sums of money, promissory notes, and property deeds. She turned a page and froze. Richard Caldwell, Viscount of Linfield, debt assumed by A. Harrington. £40,000. She flipped the page frantically. Croft Shipping Enterprises, controlling interest acquired by A. Harrington via proxy. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. You hold Richard's debts. You own the shipping line. You control Evangeline Croft's fortune. I do, Arthur said softly, his voice suddenly thick with an emotion she couldn't identify. But if you control their fortunes, why would Richard run away with her? He needed money to save himself from. She trailed off, the horrific realization dawning on her. Arthur stepped into her personal space. He knelt before the sofa, his large frame, forcing her to look directly into his dark, storm-filled eyes. He didn't run away for love, Genevieve, Arthur whispered, his voice a low, rough baritone that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He ran because I sent him a note at 6 o'clock this morning. I told him that if he dared to place a ring on your finger, I would call in every debt by noon and have him thrown into Fleet Prison to rot. Genevieve stopped breathing. The room spun. You, she gasped, shrinking back against the leather cushions. You orchestrated this. You ruined my wedding. I saved you from a lifetime chained to a weak gambling coward who would have sold your family's legacy to cover his pharaoh losses, Arthur countered fiercely, his hand shooting out to grip her knee through the wet silk. He didn't deserve you. He couldn't protect you. Protect me, Genevieve laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. You humiliated me. You left me standing at the altar before 400 people. Why? Just to win the Yorkshire mines? Just to finally destroy my father's memory? Damn the mines! Arthur roared, the sudden explosion of volume making her jump. He surged upward, pacing wildly across the rug, his hands raking through his dark hair. The carefully constructed mask of the cold, indifferent Duke was gone, replaced by something wild, angry, and desperate. I could have taken those mines a year ago if I truly wished it, he growled, turning back to face her, his chest heaving. Do you think I care about coal, Genevieve? Do you think I bought Caldwell's debts and bought out the Croft empire for coal? He crossed the room in 2 long strides, grabbing the edges of the velvet coat draped over her shoulders, pulling her up so she was forced to stand before him. He was inches away, his heat radiating against her cold skin. I did it. Because for 3 years, ever since you looked me in the eye at Richmond's ball and promised to poison me, I have not known a single night's peace, Arthur confessed, his voice dropping to a harsh, ragged whisper. I did it because the thought of you walking down the aisle toward that pathetic excuse for a man made me want to burn London to the ground. Genevieve stared at him, paralyzed by the raw, naked possession burning in his eyes. I expected you to run to the country, to hide your head in shame, Arthur continued, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw, wiping away a smear of soot. I was going to give you a month to mourn your pride, and then I was going to ride to your estate and offer you the world. I never expected you to march through a tempest, in a ruined wedding dress, straight to the devil's door. He looked down at her lips, his breathing ragged. You came to me offering a bargain, Arthur murmured, his forehead resting against hers. I will take it. I will marry you today. I will pay your family's debts. But hear me well, Genevieve. His hands slid down to grip her waist, his touch branding her through the damp silk. This is not a business transaction. I will not be your pawn, and you will not be my revenge. If you wear the Harrington ring, you are mine. Body, soul, and legacy. There is no retreat. You will be my duchess in every sense of the word. Do we have a deal? Genevieve looked up into the eyes of her greatest enemy, the man who had ruined her life, only to offer her a new, terrifyingly passionate one. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was standing in the ashes of her old life, and Arthur Harrington was handing her the match. Yes, she whispered into the space between them. Arthur's eyes darkened, and before she could take another breath, he crashed his lips down onto hers, sealing the devil's bargain in fire and rain. The kiss was a cataclysm. It tasted of rain, expensive brandy, and the sudden, violent collision of two lives that had spent years in orbit around a mutual, burning hatred. When Arthur finally broke the embrace, he did not step back. He kept his hands firmly planted on Genevieve's waist, his chest heaving as he stared down at her flushed face. The coldness that had gripped her bones was entirely gone, replaced by a terrifying, electric heat. Before either of them could speak, the heavy oak doors of the study burst open, crashing against the mahogany paneling. I demand you release her this instant, Ashbourne. A shrill, aristocratic voice echoed through the room. Genevieve flinched, instinctively stepping behind Arthur's broad shoulder. Standing in the doorway, dripping onto the Persian rugs, was her estranged cousin, Lord Alistair Sterling. Beside him stood a thin, rat-faced man, clutching a leather briefcase, Mr. Josiah Crabtree, the most corrupt solicitor in the Inns of Court. Arthur did not look surprised. He slowly turned, his expression instantly morphing back into the cold, predatory mask of the Duke. He casually adjusted his cuffs, shielding Genevieve from their view. Alistair, Arthur drawled, his voice dangerously soft. You are trespassing in my home. Barnaby must be slipping in his old age to let a parasite through the front door. Watch your tongue, your grace, Alistair sneered, though he wisely took a half-step back. I am here for my cousin. I received word that Richard Caldwell abandoned her at St. George's as her nearest male relative, and with her father deceased. I am asserting my legal right as the head of the Sterling family. You are nothing of the sort, Genevieve snapped, stepping out from behind Arthur, the heavy velvet smoking jacket still draped over her ruined silk dress. My father loathed you. You have no legal standing over me. Ah, but I do, my dear, ruined cousin. Alistair smiled, a greasy, triumphant expression. He snapped his fingers, and Crabtree fumbled with his briefcase, pulling out a yellowed parchment. Your late father, in his desperate final months, took a substantial loan from a private syndicate. The collateral was the deed to the Yorkshire coal mines. A stipulation of the contract, signed by his own hand, stated that if the Sterling estate defaulted, or if you failed to secure a titled marriage by your 21st birthday, the deeds revert to the loan's guarantor. Genevieve's blood ran cold. Today was her 21st birthday. And let me guess, Arthur said, crossing his arms. You are the guarantor. Precisely, Alistair said, his eyes gleaming with greed. Caldwell fled. The wedding did not happen. The sun sets in precisely 2 hours, at which point the Yorkshire mines and the Stirling estate belong to me. Come along, Genevieve. I have a carriage waiting to take you to a quiet convent in France. It is the best a ruined woman can hope for. The pieces fell into place with a sickening thud. It was you, Genevieve whispered, her voice trembling with absolute fury. You tipped Richard off about the true extent of our family debt. You orchestrated his cold feet so that I would be left at the altar, ensuring you would steal the mines. Business is a ruthless game, my dear. Alistair chuckled. You were always too sentimental. Now, fetch your things. The carriage is cold. She is going nowhere, Arthur commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the enclosed space. You have no claim to her, Ashbourne, Alistair shouted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. The law is on my side. If you try to stop me, Crabtree will have the magistrate here in 10 minutes. Arthur let out a low, dark laugh that made even the solicitor flinch. He walked slowly back to his heavy iron safe, retrieving the same leather-bound ledger he had shown Genevieve earlier. He tossed it onto his desk. You speak of business, Alistair, but you play it like a desperate child, Arthur said, leaning over the desk like a panther preparing to strike. Did you truly believe a syndicate in London could move that much capital without my knowledge? Without my involvement? Alistair's smug smile faltered. What are you talking about? I own the syndicate, Arthur stated smoothly. I bought out the private lenders 18 months ago, which means, Alistair, you do not hold the debt. I do. Crabtree, the solicitor, began to shake. He rapidly flipped through his own documents, his face draining of color. My lord, Crabtree squeaked, looking at Alistair. The Duke, he speaks the truth. The deed transfers were legally executed last year. That is impossible, Alistair shrieked. The clause still states she must marry a peer by her 21st birthday, or the estate is forfeit. Then it is a magnificent stroke of luck that I am a duke, Arthur replied. He reached into the inner pocket of his discarded jacket on the chair and pulled out a crisp, heavy piece of vellum, sealed with the red wax crest of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He tossed it onto the desk beside the ledger. A special license, Arthur declared, signed yesterday by Charles Manners Sutton himself, granting me the right to marry Genevieve Stirling at any time, in any place. Genevieve gasped. She stared at the document, then up at Arthur's unyielding profile. Yesterday? She breathed. You had this yesterday? Arthur finally looked back at her, the hard lines of his face softening for a fraction of a second. I told you, Genevieve, I was not going to let you marry him. I had intended to stop the wedding myself, but Caldwell's cowardice beat me to the church. He turned his blazing eyes back to Alistair. Barnaby! The butler materialized in the doorway almost instantly, holding a silver tray with a Bible. Behind him stood a nervous-looking vicar, whom Arthur must have sent for the moment Genevieve had arrived. Show these two gentlemen out, Arthur ordered, pointing a long finger at Alistair and the solicitor. And if Lord Alistair ever sets foot on my property again, release the hounds. You cannot do this. This is theft. Alistair screamed as Barnaby and two burly footmen grabbed him by the arms, dragging him backward out of the study. Consider it the cost of doing business, Arthur called out as the heavy doors were slammed shut, cutting off Alistair's furious tirade. The room fell silent once more, save for the crackle of the fire. The vicar stood awkwardly in the corner, clutching his prayer book. Arthur turned to Genevieve. The arrogant, untouchable Duke was gone. In his place was a man laying his entire empire and his entire heart bare before her. I apologize for the lack of imported white roses, Arthur said softly, closing the distance between them and taking her cold, bruised hands in his warm ones. And I apologize that your wedding gown is ruined. But I swear to you, Genevieve, if you say these vows with me now, no one will ever dare scheme against you, disrespect you, or hurt you again. You will be safe. You will be sovereign. Genevieve looked down at her mud-stained silk, the wreckage of the life she thought she was supposed to live. Then she looked up into the dark, fiercely loyal eyes of the man she had been taught to hate. She realized, with a sudden, breathtaking clarity, that the fire she had always felt when fighting Arthur Harrington wasn't hatred at all. It was passion. It was recognition. It was an equal match. "I don't need white roses, Arthur," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "I just need you." In the dim, firelit study, accompanied by the driving rain against the glass, Genevieve Sterling and Arthur Harrington spoke their vows. There were no 400 gossiping guests. There was no grand choir. There was only the solemn promise of two former enemies, binding their souls, their fortunes, and their futures, together, forever. 3 days later, London was holding its collective breath. The rumors had spread through the drawing rooms of Mayfair like a wildfire. Genevieve Sterling vanished from the altar. Viscount Linfield eloped with the Croft fortune. The Duke of Ashbourne called in the Croft debts and bankrupted them by Tuesday morning. Society was ravenous for the truth, and the Prince Regent's grand fete at Carlton House was the perfect hunting ground. The massive ballroom was aglow with thousands of wax candles, the air thick with the scent of hot wax, expensive perfume, and vicious gossip. Standing near the gilded pillars were Richard Caldwell and Evangeline Croft. They were not mingling. They stood isolated, looking haggard and terrified. The quiet elopement they had planned had turned into a nightmare. Within hours of their flight, Arthur's solicitors had seized the Croft shipping warehouses at the docks and frozen Richard's bank accounts. They had been forced to return to London, humiliated and penniless, begging the Prince Regent's circle for a loan just to keep a roof over their heads. Suddenly, the extravagant string orchestra abruptly stopped playing. The master of ceremonies struck his heavy staff against the marble floor 3 times. The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the hundreds of titled guests. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne," the announcer bellowed, his voice carrying over the dead silence. He paused, looking at the card in his hand, his eyes widening briefly before he continued. "And Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashbourne." A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Fans stopped fluttering. Monocles dropped from shocked eyes. At the top of the grand, sweeping staircase stood Arthur Harrington. He was magnificent in stark, formal black evening wear, the diamond pin in his cravat catching the candlelight. And on his arm, holding her head high, was Genevieve. She was not the pale, ruined, tragic bride they expected to see. She was a revelation. Genevieve wore a gown of deep, midnight sapphire silk that clung to her curves and swept behind her in a dramatic train. But it was not the dress that commanded the room's absolute awe. It was the jewelry. Resting against her collarbones was the legendary Harrington sapphire, a stone the size of a robin's egg, surrounded by flawless diamonds. It was a necklace that had belonged to Arthur's mother, locked away in a vault for 3 decades. By wearing it, Genevieve was untouchable. She was not just married, she was crowned. Arthur placed his hand over hers where it rested on his forearm, giving her a reassuring, possessive squeeze. They began their descent. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, aristocrats scrambling out of their path, bowing and curtsying deeply out of sheer, terrified respect. They moved with predatory grace across the ballroom, directly toward the gilded pillars, directly toward Richard Caldwell. Richard's face drained of the little color it had left. He looked from Genevieve, radiant and terrifying, to the cold, lethal glare of the Duke. Evangeline Croft shrank behind Richard's arm, clutching her fan nervously. "Genevieve," Richard stammered, stepping forward, a pathetic, pleading look in his eyes. "Genevieve, please, you must speak to him. He has taken everything." "My estate, Evangeline's ships. We are ruined. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive." Genevieve let go of Arthur's arm and took one step closer to the man who had abandoned her. The ballroom held its breath, straining to hear her response. "Forgive you?" Genevieve asked, her voice carrying clear and bright, like the ringing of fine crystal. She smiled, a cool, terrifying smile that perfectly mirrored her new husband's. Viscount Linfield, you misunderstand the situation entirely. I have no anger left for you. In fact, I am deeply indebted to you. Richard blinked, confused. Indebted? Yes, she said, her eyes flashing with triumph. If you had not been such a monumental coward on Saturday morning, I might have made the catastrophic mistake of marrying a weak, foolish boy. Instead, you drove me directly into the arms of a king. She turned slightly, looking up at Arthur. The sheer, unmasked adoration and fierce love that passed between them was palpable, raw enough to make the watching crowd blush. Arthur's lips curved into a devastating, triumphant smirk. Genevieve looked back at Richard. The debts stand, Lord Linfield. You sold your honor for a shipping fortune, only to find the ships belong to my husband. I suggest you learn to enjoy the country air. London is no longer for you. Without waiting for his response, Genevieve turned back to Arthur and seamlessly slipped her hand into his arm. Shall we dance, Your Grace? She asked, her voice softening just for him. We shall, Your Grace, Arthur replied, his voice a low, rough rumble that sent a familiar thrill down her spine. As the orchestra hurriedly struck up a sweeping waltz, Arthur pulled Genevieve into the center of the floor. He spun her into his arms, oblivious to the hundreds of eyes watching them. The society, vultures, the scheming cousins, the cowardly ex-fiancés, they all faded away, reduced to nothing but shadows outside the brilliant, burning light of what they had found in each other. You were magnificent, Arthur whispered against her ear as they turned, his hand warm and strong against her back. I had an excellent teacher, Genevieve murmured, looking up into his dark eyes, tracing the faint line of his scar with her gaze. I told you I was going to ruin your life. Ashbourne. Arthur laughed, a genuine, deep sound that echoed over the music, pulling her impossibly closer until there was no space between the Sterling legacy and the Harrington Empire. You did, my love, he promised, his lips brushing against hers in a fleeting, fiery kiss right in front of the entire ton. And I have never been more grateful for the destruction. What a breathtaking journey of betrayal, vengeance, and a love that burned brighter than the fiercest hatred. From standing abandoned in the freezing rain to ruling the highest ranks of London society, Genevieve and Arthur proved that sometimes your greatest enemy is actually your soulmate in disguise. The way she confronted her cowardly ex-fiancé at the end was absolute perfection. If you loved this intense historical romance drama, you will not want to miss the incredible stories we have coming up next. Please take a second to like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily dramatic tales. Thank you so much for watching, and let us know in the comments what you thought of the Duke's brilliant revenge.
Hi, my name is Primal Bond Living, the owner and manager of Primal Bond Living. After watching the video, she showed up in a wedding dress at her enemy's door. The Duke's reaction changed both their lives. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the mix of vulnerability and courage in the story. It takes a lot to stand in front of someone you consider an enemy and risk changing the course of your life. What made the story engaging for me was watching how unexpected choices can challenge old grudges and open the door to understanding where neither person expected to find it. Do you think people can truly move past resentment when they are given a second chance to see each other differently? And if you were in the Duke's position, how would you have reacted to such an unexpected visit? Stories like this remind me that sometimes the biggest turning points in life come from moments we never planned for. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy historical romance stories filled with emotion, tension, and unexpected connections, Feel free to like and subscribe for more whenever you'd like.